amazing pleasure. It is an amazing pleasure to welcome our audience to this Skirball Tapes and to welcome the exhilarating and magnificent writer, Robin Coste Lewis, is our guest. She is, of course, more than a writer. She works with the visual arts, with musicians, and other artists. She is a person of restless curiosity in a wide range of knowledge, of history, of art history, of ancient languages, and of popular culture. And I would suggest to all of us that she is reforming history and art history and poetry as, in popular culture, an all-Black cast and producers did in the 1978 film, The Wiz, which reformed The Wizard of Oz. In late 2022, she published her second book of poetry and photographs, To the Realization of Perfect Helplessness. And it had been preceded in 2015 by The Extraordinary Voyage of the Sable Venus, which she dedicated to beauty with a capital B. And they both have won major awards, as she will continue to do so. Welcome, Robin, and you've been very nicely said, you love answering questions. And so what I would suggest to our audience is we will stop talking about 1140. And then put your questions, can I say to our audience, put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will take the questions there, though we will have to have a hard stop at noon. So again, Robin, I am thrilled to be talking to you. I'm just delighted to be talking to you. And let's just look, if we can, just take the quickest look at the cover of both of these books. Well, we were going to take a look at the cover of both of these books. And here is the 2022 To the Realization of Perfect Helplessness. And next is the 2015 book in a new edition, Voyage of the Sable Venus. And I think it's important, and Robin and I will get to this, they show the ordinary life of members of the African diaspora.
Yes.
That she is making heroes out of ordinary survival. Now, I am going to be perfectly straightforward. I want as many people as possible to read these books. But what I also want everyone to hear is the beautiful attitude that Robin has towards her readers. So Robin, how would you describe it? When you think of being read or being listened to in your interviews or being heard in your lectures, how do you feel about the people who have come to read or to listen?
I love that you begin this webinar with a question about readers. Before I answer it, I want to thank everyone who conspired and all the hard work that you guys do behind the scenes to have me. It's a great honor. It's a great honor to be with you, Dean Stimpson. I know I'm going to call you Kate.
Please, yes.
It is a great honor to be in conversation with you. I'm a huge fan of your work, so it means the honor's all mine. My readers, I don't know if anything is more precious or important to me besides my research and my work with regard to art making, book making. There is an intimacy that is mysterious that a reader and writer creates together. And so I'm not from the camp of writing that thinks the reader is unimportant. I think there's nothing more important besides the design of the book and the writing of the book. A book is a very tricky, mysterious object. And, there's lots of scholarship and theories about this, but it's a vehicle to transport. It's a transportation thing. And if I can touch a reader's life, I think that's a profound responsibility. Someone's attention, if someone is giving me their attention, I feel like I have a responsibility to meet them in a very serious way. And so the page is not, it's an aesthetic and intellectual playground for me, certainly, but a page is many things. And one of the things it is a profound responsibility. And so I take it very seriously, and my readers are the most important things to me.
Well, that generosity and respect is rare and very welcome. You said you wanted to give your readers not a caption, but an experience.
Yes.
And what is it you want us to know? Do you want us to explore our own dreams as you explore yours? What would you like us to take away?
I don't know if I had to it depends on the page, right? You're talking about the new book, Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah. It depends on the page, right? I'm trying to do poetry. Oh, is that me with the echo? I hear echo. Poetry is a very enduring art form. It's been around almost since we were upright and began verbalizing. And I think the reason for that endurance is that it can do many things at once. A word can be many things at once. That's what makes poetry, at least for me, so deeply compelling. And so it depends on the page that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But that said, I want the quote that you just offered is, I do think one of the things that distinguishes poetry from all other art forms is that if done thoughtfully, it can literally give the reader an experience, and usually that's a sensation or aesthetic experience. We can talk about that more when we talk about my background in Sanskrit and South Asian aesthetics, but I'm trying to, in everything I do, I hope what I'm maybe succeeding at is having the readers experience the kind of sanctity of their own lives.
Who taught you to read? Who taught you?
This is a great question. I don't remember. I don't remember who taught me to read. I do remember always knowing how. My mother and father were avid newspaper readers. Obsessive. And so I do remember, and my mother used to always joke about being in bed with them when I was 3, and each had a newspaper wide open, right? And I was between them. And my mother would always joke that I would try to read it. I love that my introduction to literature was through print culture, and the newspaper, I believe very mightily in print culture and the newspaper. So I don't really remember, because I don't remember not knowing how to read. I wish I did. It would be a great memory, but I would have to say it was probably my mother, because I think she taught me how to write. I knew how to read and write before I went to school. That much I do remember, before I went to kindergarten. So I imagine it's probably my mother, because she was a great literature head in that way.
You've written that you found reading Margaret Walker's poem, For My People,
yes,
also gave you some explosive sense of possibility.
Yes. Thank you for asking that question. I think it's very difficult for people who are not my age or older to really grasp just how misogynist, racist, xenophobic the curriculums were during our time growing up. So, and our teachers, right? And so it was nothing for a teacher to ask all the Black kids to kneel outside, and whip them with a yardstick. Nothing. I got whipped so many times by my teachers, mostly for being precocious. Right. And so, how do I put this? And so the literature that we were asked to read too reflected that xenophobia back to us. I never saw any beauty attached to any bodies of color. I never really saw bodies of color in my, from kindergarten to 12th grade. We didn't read literature by people of color. I didn't know that Black women novelists even existed until I was in 11th grade. I had no clue.
And
Because
this
was in Los Angeles, the second largest city in America. And I was a gifted student. I was in AP English, and my AP English teacher asked me if I knew how to tap dance and did I like watermelon. We didn't read people of color. I didn't know they existed, novelists. But one day, I think I was in elementary school, I came across this poem you're referencing by Margaret Walker, For My People, which is an extraordinary epic poem. And it changed me so deeply because I didn't know that English could be anything other than a tool of oppression. And that poem taught me that you could take English and kind of steal it and do something else with it that it itself had not anticipated about itself, right?
Robin, are you making a deliberate pun? Because you're a great punster.
Yes, of course.
Are you making a deliberate pun on steal, S-T-E-A?
Yes, of course.
And steal, S-T-E-A?
Yes. Because one word can do many things at once. That's why I love poetry so much, of course. Yeah.
Yes. But you also write wonderfully about your father.
Yes.
Your father, who was a janitor and who you say was at heart a mathematician.
Oh, he was a genius mathematically. It was scary. He used to joke. He would tell jokes about pi when I was like, I don't know, again, elementary school. I mean, I think it's tragic to think about it, and it's also glorious to think about it. I think this is true for all poor people all over the world. You know, my grandparents, my father's parents, somehow, I don't know how, because my mère on my father's side was a seamstress and a cleaning lady. My other grandmother, the one with whom I grew up, and then my grandfather on my father's side was a blacksmith. But somehow they made enough money in New Orleans to send my uncle, my father's oldest brother, to medical school at Howard. But they only had enough money, so the other two siblings couldn't go to college. So my dad joined the war. I mean, he was drafted; he didn't have a choice, but he couldn't have gone to college. And so I think the story, and that was a well-known thing, and I think that the story is very common for working class people. You have to choose a kid. It's painful. Which one will you invest in? And the others you can't. And that's not specific to my family. That's specific to migrants and immigrants and poor people worldwide.
But out of all these experiences, you are weaving, I believe, and I more than believe it, I am utterly convinced of this, that when I read your work, I am in the presence of one of our epics, but certainly an epic poet of the 21st century. Now, when I call you an epic poet, do you feel I'm trying to pigeonhole you? I'm trying to pin you down? Or
no, I actually feel quite seen aesthetically. I don't know how to take on small projects. I mean, I do. I write small poems, but where the juice is for me is in taking a big bite out of history, and grappling with something for years and years. I also don't think it's a coincidence because I studied epic all my life. I've been reading epics from all over the world. Before we went live with this webinar, we were discussing how when I was an undergraduate in the 80s, you couldn't read epics by people of color. In fact, if you looked at your curriculum, I went to Hampshire College undergrad, which meant I also went to Smith, Mount Holyoke, UMass, and Amherst, because of 5 colleges, you can take classes at every institution, which I did. I took most of my classes at Smith in anthropology. And the reason being is that in order to read epics by people of color, you had to take anthropology. And I know it's disgusting. It's so racist. This was in the 80s.
In the
80s. Absolutely. But at least they taught them most, I mean, racist as it is, most institutions don't, you would never know that, you know, that there are epics from all over the world unless you, I mean, now it's a little different. It's not as different as it needs to be. Sanskrit is no longer taught in the classics department. Sanskrit used to be in the classics department, and then they moved it out. I joke that it's a fear of a brown planet or fear of a brown epic. I mean, I quilted together a major for myself, and I could only have done that at Hampshire College because it's experimental education. But I don't want to be as verbose. I could talk about epics forever, but the way that I was able to do this this kind of independent study with this obsession is of epics by people of color is I had to take classes in anthropology. But yeah, so I'm not surprised that when I became a poet, which I hadn't always been, that the practice that would compel me most was the long poem.
Right. Well, just to remind our audience, the epic is the biggest narrative going.
Yeah.
It is huge.
Sure.
It begins in song. It begins in myth.
Yeah.
And of your epics, which is also the epic of the diaspora, in your epic, you're devising nothing less than a cosmology.
Thank you for noticing. I'm certainly trying.
All right. So you're looking at the origins of the universe itself. You once described this as your sort of nerdiness, your geekiness.
Yes,
I don't think it's nerdy or geeky. I think it's magnificently ambitious.
Thank you.
So tell us how you're balancing science about the Big Bang theory of the origins of the universe and the ancient Indian epics.
Sure.
In which you're so well versed. So
sure.
How do you describe the origins according to scientific explanation? I think we have a quote I'd love to have you just look at this quote.
Sure.
If we could. This is before the birth of stars. Can we put the quote up? Well, if the quote's not going to go up, we both have the copy of the book.
I think it's coming. Yeah.
Tell us about this as a sort of one of the pillars of your cosmology.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for even noticing that this is a central a central theme to this project. And it's very important to me. We talk a lot about the future and not enough about the past, but the ways in which we think about the past in America, for me, are in units of centuries, which I think is insulting. And I don't think we do ourselves enough justice. For example, I'm very interested in epics from sub-Saharan Africa, of which they are some. And right now there's these ongoing excavations in Senegal of ancient pottery from the 3000s and 4000s. And because of the ways in which we think about America, we can't imagine that before slavery there was anything else. And so partly I'm trying to rupture the myth of 4 centuries. That just needs to go. I think it's a fascinating tool of indoctrination. But also, when you think about the history of Western art, we often use the cave paintings as a symbol of why the West is the seat of civilization, without acknowledging that there are cave paintings and art from caves that from all over the world. And the oldest that we know of is from a cave in South Africa called the Blombos Cave. And the earliest piece of art we have from it is from 70,000 years ago. And when I discovered that fact, it kind of shook me to my core, because I wondered what would happen if the whole world thought about our origins of art occurring in the tip of South Africa. And that one cave has been excavated down to 150,000 years of continuous human activity. And so with regard to this quote,
you want to read it? You read beautifully.
Sure. This is from a poem called Before. Before the birth of stars, live black matter, and their bright, dark afterglow. Before transition, before impact, when the beginning was the end, and tomorrow was our only land. And so with this quote, I'm also, of course, speaking about the future and the past simultaneously, and the cosmology of our universe and our planet as we know. But I'm trying to push the reader a little bit to rethink or to consider how they have been taught to think about the origin of our universe and the roles in which racism and sexism has played in that thinking.
But this,
well, let me just, so in my research as a Sanskritist, of course, thousands of years ago, philosophers, Indian philosophers said that there was not just one Big Bang, but many, right? And it's only been in the last few years, and by few, I mean 10, in Western science, that they're starting to catch up with the Indian cosmonauts from 5,000 years ago to say, oh my God, it's not just one Big Bang, there have been many. In Hindu iconography, one of my favorite gods is Shiva as Nataraja, and he's dancing, right? And all these universes are covering him, that he's created and destroyed and sustained. And so, I said this recently at another event, that I think in this book, the subject is time. I'm trying to interrogate time, both how it has been manufactured, like we make time up all the time, right? In the Jewish calendar, I think it's in the 5,400s, right? In Mussolini's calendar, Mussolini started the whole calendar over when he took power, right? And so in this book, I'm trying to have us reconsider how little we actually know about time, how small-minded we're being with regard to what we think about American time, and within that, recontextualize the African diaspora as an active participant.
Yes, absolutely, but also in the epic, and you are writing an epic, each book and together. You do the exploration of the evolution of the stars and the seas.
Yes, of course.
And then the origins of humanity in Africa, and moving out, and language evolving. And then your explorations of history. And is it fair to say, as an epic writer, you see the heroes in history. You see the heroes, but your sense of history is also of the survivor, and your sense of history is of the diaspora and the survivors who came forward. And you have a lovely quote about when you were writing the history in Voyage, and you say, history to them. I'd love to have you help us think through this. When you say, history is the sea upon which I grew drunk. And the second quote, which I think also references the history of slavery. History is a runaway slave, running, trying to find someplace to be safe.
Yes, thank you for referencing those quotes. They mean a lot to me.
I'll speak
about what did you say? I didn't hear you.
No, I'm so excited to talk to you, but I want to hear you, not myself.
So history is the sea upon which I grew drunk.
Yeah.
I think that, so the notion of the hero is something that I don't necessarily, that I intend to interrogate and hopefully destroy at every step. Right?
Why is that? What?
Because of the history of the hero. You're talking about the hero in epic form. I'm talking about in American. So let me distinguish between what you're asking me and what how I have been indoctrinated in language, right? For me, growing up, the hero was always somebody, say, like Eisenhower. Let's just use this as an example, right? Great president, according to lots of people. My experience of Eisenhower from the mouth of my father, who fought in World War II, is that Eisenhower was a horrific racist and xenophobe, and went out of his way to torture Black Yanks who were serving in the war. So, for example, there are many. For example, the day that the war ended, Eisenhower stopped his celebrations to send out a wire to all the army. He was a general then, to ensure that the Black Yanks were not allowed to celebrate the end of the war with the white Yanks, that everything had to be segregated. Right. So and then I would go on as a child. I heard these stories from my father. I would go on to go into school and hear people, applauding Eisenhower, both as a general and as a president, because when he came home, he eventually came to president, as a hero. But in my mind, I knew him as the man who was so appalling that he actually stopped to send a wire to keep the celebrations of violence ending, segregated, right? And so this notion of the hero for a Black person, of course, is always suspect, always, right? Napoleon's a hero, right? I know that, what Napoleon did to the Francophone colonies, of which I am one, Louisiana, appalling. What France did to Haiti, appalling, right? And so, it's very important to me to just distinguish between those two things. For me, if I had to be pushed upon what a hero is, it's the people in my new book, right? It's you, it's me, it's the guy who's, washing the window. I just think the myth of the exceptional human being is very, very dangerous. Or I think that exceptionality is as common as dirt.
But it's a wonderful way of rewriting the epic.
Yeah, exactly.
The deconstruction of a conventional notion of the hero, and to place heroism in all of us.
Right.
Would you call it a democratic theory, or is that just too highfalutin?
No, democratizing the hero is very important. And I do think that the ancient epics were meant to be just that. Right. I had the profound story, as you know, Kate, we've talked about this. I feel so deeply lucky that I got to study with the scholars that I've been blessed to study with all my life. One of those people that I've never gotten a chance to talk about much is the great sociologist Veena Das, who is now at Johns Hopkins, who was in Delhi for many, many years. I met her at Amherst when I was an undergrad. I still have my notebook from a class I took with her on the goddess and feminine in India. It was a sociology class, but it also included theological texts. And one of the things she talked about when talking about the epics is that when you read an epic, you're not supposed to identify with the hero solely. You're supposed to identify with every character in the text. All of those characters are emanations and versions of the self, yourself. You are both the hero and the demon. You are both the villain and the savior. You are both the plant and the god. You are all those characters, right? It is purely a landscape where the self expresses its kind of multiplicity, right? And that's how I was taught to read, right? And so, but for a lot of us, we're taught that the hero is someone disembodied from who we are, that we can never be that emperor on the horse, riding into battle to colonize, also known as save a people, right? We can never be that person. And for me, I thought, well, and I've often thought, and I didn't know I thought this until I really started writing deeply, that the most interesting people in my life were the people I was sitting between who were holding those newspapers open, right? Those were the most interesting people, of course. And everyone around me. I grew up, that's why Margaret Walker's poem moved me so deeply. I grew up saturated in the beauty of migration. And my father, my parents are from Louisiana, and I'm sure other people looking on can relate to this, to live in 2 or 3 cultures simultaneously, right? And all of them were English. But to live in those cultures and watch the word play and the language play and the culture play all happening simultaneously, I was drunk on history. I was drunk on the gorgeous beauty of watching my parents fight over a bill, or, watching the way my aunts would step into a room, which the elegance was so extreme. And they weren't doing anything at all special, nothing. They were just coming in to sit down and watch television over my mom's house. But the beauty was profound. And then you juxtapose that with segregation, Jim Crow, lynchings, the civil rights movement, which, I was born in 1964. There are a lot of assassinations that year and the next year, right?
Yeah,
To juxtapose this profound, shimmering, exquisite cultural beauty with the horror of the history of what history was doing at that time. I don't know, the contrast taught me something about what we think of when we think about heroism.
So from the traditional epics, which you say are everywhere, and you're right.
Yes, yeah.
You are the singer,
Mm-hmm.
and you are looking for the origins.
Yes.
The origins of the species. So
Yes.
why do we have the same molecules in us as the stars do?
I know why.
You
Exactly.
You're globalizing.
Yes.
But great debts to science, great debts globally. Then, if as I understand it, it's the exploration of history, and very much the history, without ever going into a kind of the history of the race.
Yeah.
But then what you're saying is that we are all capable of heroism as well as of vileness. The grandfather who molested you, for example.
Yes.
But when we read the epics, like you write, be everyone.
Yes.
So how can we understand the self if we don't understand? Do I have this right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Let me run before.
Before you move on, I just want to say, I've written about my grandfather's sincere pedophilia. He molested many, many, many of my cousins. We were all the same generation. And one of the things that has helped me integrate the violence of that childhood with him is realizing and talking to family members that my grandfather was grossly abused as a child, apparently. I didn't know this for many, many years. I've known it now for about 20 years. And it helps me in realizing that his mental illness, right? And I don't pretend to understand pedophilia, and I don't need to. But that said, we pass our madness on. We do. And it's really important. And the sad thing about my grandfather is, aside from the fact that he was a profoundly violent sexual abuser, he was a beautiful, beautiful human being in other aspects of his life. And I've never said that sentence aloud in my whole entire life, and that's what I'm trying to look at with my work, is how taut is that tightrope that we step upon every single day, and we make decisions every single day. I do not think that I am better than my grandfather. I do not think I'm better than any xenophobe, any dictator. I think that it's a very slippery slope into madness and darkness. And I see it all around me every day.
You are arguing in your life and in your poetry against, how can I call it, an aggressive self-righteousness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm also really bored by it too, which is why I don't read a lot, some stuff, I get very bored, because I think it's really, Black people still are for a lot of places, but it used to be much more common in the government. It was institutionalized. I used to be a them, they, those people, right? I heard that all my life growing up, in my textbooks, in the classroom, your people, those people over there. I know what it feels like. in myself to be on the other end. And so I will be the last person to think that I just think that to now in my mature years, to now say, I am different than those people. And by those people, I mean xenophobes, right? The ultra right, white supremacists. For me to think that I am above that kind of hatred would only be delusion.
So this is tied in, isn't it, with your beautiful ethic of reading, where reading we become everything and understand it. But also there is an ethic in you of generosity and respect.
I don't know.
You don't have to say yes, because you would hate yourself, I think, if you said, oh, I have an ethic of generosity and respect. So let me say it to you. I would hate to do this. I really hate to do this, because I am submitting this to the tyranny of the clock. The minute, hours.
Speaking of time.
Hours, minutes, and seconds. But it would be so, speaking of epics, you and a collaborator, Kevin Young, were asked or agreed to look at Robert Rauschenberg's drawings about another epic, which is the medieval Christian epic by Dante, which I read, called The Divine Comedy.
Yes.
And you each selected a canto to rewrite or to erase previous translations, a canto to write a poem about.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be very grateful, and I think we all would be, if you would read your Canto 23. And one reason is it's the descent into hell, but how to come out of it at the same time.
Absolutely.
An epic
Absolutely.
journey. So may I, before we go to the questions, may I ask you to read your canto?
Certainly. Before I do, I want to say that Kevin and I wrote, it's the whole book that we wrote. So we split it up between us. We went halfsies.
We went
halfsies over Dante. And the translation we used was Ciardi's Inferno, because Rauschenberg, so it's a book about Rauschenberg's erasures, and Rauschenberg was that's the book that he used for the rubbings that he did, but also he was so much about public culture and public material, and use these rubbings. And so I did several cantos, and the canto that you're asking me to read is one of those, but it's from a longer epic that I wrote called, the title of the entire project is Dante Comes to America, the 20th of January, 2017, an erasure of 17 cantos from Ciardi's Inferno after Robin Rauschenberg. And for those looking on, you will, of course, I hope, recognize that date as the date that Donald Trump was inaugurated as the president after Barack Obama. And this particular poem, and all the poems I wrote really, are erasures of Ciardi, because I was trying to match Rauschenberg with his rubbings and erasings of newspapers and things like that. But also, Dante's a very political writer, and
is he?
Yeah, which I admire about him so much. And anybody who wants to know what it feels like to be a writer, or why you should not mess with writers, is rest assured you'll show up in our work. And I love that Dante, so many politicians and theologians and priests of Dante's day showed up in hell. So this is Canto 23. It's also known, it takes place in the sixth circle, or the sixth bolge of hell, which is the circle of hypocrites. So the subtitle is, I Go with the Body That Was Always Mine. Silent, one following the other, the fable hunted us down. O weary mantle of eternity, turn, laugh, reach us down into that narrow way in silence. college of sorry hypocrites. I go with the body that was always mine, burnished like counterweights to keep the peace. One may still see that sort of peace we kept, marvel for a while over that. The cross and hell's eternal exile. Somewhere there is some gap in the wall, a pit through which we may climb to the next brink without the need of summoning the black angels and forcing them to raise us up from the sink. Nearer than hope, there is a bridge that runs from the great circle that crosses every ditch from ridge to ridge, except it is broken, but with care.
Robin, I feel the need for a pause after hearing that. But the building of the new bridges with care is one of the things you do as an epic poet.
You. Thank you. I hope so.
I believe so. You must live in hope. I live in belief in you.
Thank you.
Now we have some wonderful questions coming in.
Oh, great.
There was one from Jennifer Morgan. Can I see that on the screen?
Hi, Jennifer.
Let me see this question. Yeah. It takes me a little while. There's some really terrific questions here. Here's the one from Jennifer Morgan, who is, it's the Jennifer Morgan I think we both know is a Black historian.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about poetry and race. Your work in Voyage of the Sable Venus is profoundly beautiful, painful, and impactful. I return to it again and again. I wondered if you could speak a bit about the discipline and process of writing Voyage, the stricture that you imposed, and whether or not you were explicitly in conversation with Norbez's Phillips' work in Zong. So a lot of
This is a great question. Thank you so much, Professor. No, I didn't read Norbez's book until a couple of years after Voyage came out. Believe it or not, I was a graduate student when I wrote Voyage. And the title poem I wrote in my first year of my MFA with the magnificently brilliant genius Sharon Olds. I conceived of the poem when I was at Cave Canem with another mentor of mine, Toy Derricott. But I love, and I'm so deeply honored because I love Norbez's book so much that people often couple our two books together because I do think that they are in conversation. How did I write this book is I think what your question is asking me, or that title poem. I thought that poem would be a 3-pager at most. I remember noticing that the first time I conceived of this poem was when I saw the title, The Voyage of the Sable Venus, from Angola to the Antilles, which is both an etching, an engraving, and a poem from the 18th century, latter part of the 18th century. And besides the usual disgust, which, most of the time I could just laugh at the madness of white supremacy and the stupidity of it all. I thought the title was sexy as hell, right? Voyage of the Sable Venus. I was like, but that title though, as the kids would say, And then I started wondering about that. Toni Morrison talks a lot about how the intense madness that, some of the trees from which our people were lynched were beautiful trees, right? And so I think that beauty, for so many reasons, is daunting. It's hard. It's dark. And by dark, I mean beautiful. And so I wondered about, well, what other titles are there out in the world that kind of perform that same madness, right? I mean, literally madness, that it's beautiful, but meanwhile, what it's reflecting or what it's the title of is just evidentiarily more white supremacist madness. And it turns out, as it turns out, there were over 20,000 titles that I found. And I had to quit because I had a stack of paper like this. And it was then that I understood what sculptors do. Up until that point, I didn't understand. You hear about sculptors looking at big, huge pieces of marble or with regard to rock-strewn architecture and seeing something in it. And I never understood that. I was like, what do you mean you see something? But I could look at the stack of paper and I saw the whole poem completely before I ever started writing it. I knew exactly what to do. It was actually really quite easy. After I did the research, right, which took many, many years, traveling around the world, once I became a mother, traveling around the internet,
with your child on your back, right?
Absolutely. I kept my baby everywhere with me. But then after I got it all together, I was like, I could just see it. I can't explain how. The same way I guess a sculptor can't explain how. I could just see what I wanted to do. And once I actually started the carving away, it was a delicious, as Toni Morris would say, it was a delicious experience. Also, for readers looking on, I actually write at length about this whole process in the paperback version of Voyage. It's a essay called Boarding the Voyage. I don't talk about what did it feel like to have, in that version, there's an essay at the end now because people ask me this question, have asked me this question a lot, not about the Phillips piece, but about the rest of it. So I guess I know I could talk about this forever. So that's why I'm referring you guys to the essay. Okay. Because I know there are other questions, but I'm really honored that you have attended my talk here with Kate, and I hope this answers your question. I wish I had thought about Phillips. I wish I had known about Phillips earlier because I admire that book so completely.
Thank you. Here is a question from an anonymous attendee.
Sure.
Speaking of time, and of Indigenous Australians' cosmology of Dreamtime.
Yes.
Do you read history, memory, experience, and epic is also explorations of dreams? Thanks for a marvelous discussion. And secondly, what is Coste in your name?
Oh my God. First of all, I've been studying Dreamtime since, again, in those anthropology classes, trying to find epics by people of color. I am so grateful to you, whoever asked this question, for asking this question. And I'm so blown away that you asked this question that I can't even remember what the question was because I'm so ecstatic right now that you asked the question. So I'm going to ask you to repeat it, Kate. But while you look it up, I'm going to tell you about the Coste in my name. Coste is my maternal bloodline, and it's as far back as we can go. It's the name we know the longest from 17th century and early 18th century Louisiana.
The question was, speaking of time and Indigenous Australians' cosmology of Dreamtime, do you read history, memory, experience, and epic? It's also explorations of dreams.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks
yes. Okay. So yes, the question is yes, not with regard to the sanctity of Australian Indigenous Dreamtime, because that's a whole other sublime idea about the world. But I think I do take something from that, in that if I do think about what is happening in the world with regard to Dreamtime, it is a nightmare, a horrific nightmare. What I also take from, I think, all of my research over the years, and think about now obsessively every day, is that absolutely everything. I keep looking at my window. You guys forgive me. I think visually, so I have to look away in order to think clearly. But at my window, there are buildings, there are cars, there's a fence, there's a blah, blah, right? I think daily about how manufactured absolutely everything about us is, from our buildings to our ideas to our emotions to, everything is manufactured. Everything is made up. There's nothing that is actually just real. It doesn't exist. This is, of course, speaking of cosmology, comes straight up out of lots of different cosmologies from all around the world that we don't study because we're so indoctrinated by the Judeo-Christian mythos. And now Islam too, which is great because I actually think that studying religion is, obviously I went to divinity school, very, very important. But I think it's more important, as your question so beautifully elucidates, that we read about theologies from all over the world. So the answer is yes, but I don't like the dream I'm having. If this is the dream, I don't like it. It's horrific and it terrifies me.
In one of the shards of language, and towards the realization, you say, you dream in several languages and speak them.
Yes, yes.
And you dream of moss on trees and palmettos.
Yeah.
As well.
Yes,
Here
absolutely.
Here we have another question from Susan John. Thank you, Susan John. Could you talk about what the language of Sanskrit allows that other / Western languages do not? You studied Sanskrit.
Sure.
What was there for you?
Oh, sure. I mean, Julia Moretti is a dear friend of mine, and we just finished collaborating, or we're still collaborating, but we just finished a part of a collaboration. I didn't know that there was an ancient language out of Ethiopia. If I had known, I would have done that before I did Sanskrit. But again, right, Western education, how would we have known that? Nobody tells you that. I didn't know. I didn't know there was ancient architecture in Africa until after I graduated, I think with my first master's. I mean, just disgusting. It's appalling what we don't allow ourselves to know or to teach. So I chose Sanskrit because it was the darkest thing I can get to, literally. If I had known that there were some other ancient languages by dark people, I would have done that too. I'm hoping to get to them now. But Sanskrit one of the many things. First of all, Sanskrit, like Greek, has 29 declensions. Greek is based on Sanskrit. People don't know that. Well, the Greek, the classicists will say, oh, ho, ho, you just said something that is impossible. I think they clutch their pearls because of the obvious reasons. But that said, there's beautiful scholarship about the kind of intertwining between Sanskrit and Greek. One of the things I love about Sanskrit is that you can put the words in any order you want. So our habit of subject, verb, object is thrown out of the window. You can use it. I mean, people do, and it's often what people use. But you can start with the object and get to the subject 20 pages later, and then it's just fluid. It's a very fluid language. It's also a very oral language. You're not supposed to speak Sanskrit. You're supposed to sing it. And that just turned me on because it's a very beautiful language to listen to.
And did you work very quickly because the high noon is coming?
Yes.
You worked with the great Sanskrit epics, did you not?
Yes, the Mahabharata is very important to me. I also had the incredible honor of studying with Stephanie Jamison. My God, great, brilliant linguist, historian, translator, and Sanskritist. She's a classicist. She speaks every classical language there is in the world. I wish I could do that. I might take that on, but yeah. The other thing I like about the other reason why I like Sanskrit so much, but it's also true of all the other religions I've studied, is that time is not limited to a lifetime. So transmigration was very important to me. The fact that that transmigration, or as we call it in a limited way, reincarnation, is such a matter of fact thing in so many religions, right? All over the world, especially the African continent, was something that was very important to me because, and that the gods stumble. The pantheon, the gods grow jealous. They lose their way. They forget that they're gods. The gods are tragic. They're a trip. I love it. It's so much more fun. I mean, you can see the joy. I'm looking at my face now on the screen. I'm like, oh my God, the gods are fun in the Hindu pantheon, and since we're in Women's History Month, I think still, most importantly, they have goddesses. They have goddesses, and the gods bow down to them. And without goddesses, the gods would be nothing. I'm translating a Sanskrit hymn about this in another 3 or 4 years, once I find some time. One of my favorite Sanskrit hymns, the Devi Mahatmyam, right? there are goddesses. I grew up as a woman. I remember, you guys are probably, people in the audience are too young to know this. I grew up knowing that my body was filthy and filled with sin, and there was probably no way I could enter heaven because I was born evil, because I had a vagina. That is in the Bible. And I went to church and I heard those sermons that women had to figure out a way to cleanse ourselves from the great evil of being born female. So imagine when I got to Sanskrit and the goddesses were kicking ass and riding tigers and, shooting arrows that could save the entire universe, and only they could do it. It was, to say it was refreshing would be the grandest understatement of all time.
Right. And this is the sable Venus.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
As I say, it's high noon, but
Yes.
not in the sense, the Gary Cooper sense of the word. I can't tell you how grateful I am.
I'm very grateful. These questions, both the discussion and the questions have floored me. Thank you for the rigor. Thank you.
I want to you wrote, quote, I want to end with your words, although I wouldn't have two words at the end. If we went back, if we went all over the world and looked at every object, every statue, every painting that included a Black female figure in any way, and wrote every title down, what would world art's epic sing then? Thank you,
Yes.
Robin Coste-Lewis,
Thank
for
you.
being our singer,
Thank you.
an epic of everyday life. Thank you so much. And
I'm so honored.
I reserve the last, well, I think it's going to be 6 words. The honor has been ours. 7 words, actually. Number 6, thank. 7th word, you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It's been an honor.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.